All right. Hello, everyone. Today is April 17th, 2019, and this is the biweekly SIG Cloud Provider meeting. So let's start first with announcements. I just got confirmed for our SIG face-to-face at KubeCon Barcelona. So this is going to be on Monday, May 20th from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. If you can make the SIG face-to-face and you can let me know ahead of time, that'd be great. I know it's probably going to conflict with other SIG face-to-face. So if we don't get enough folks that want to join the face-to-face, then we can just kind of cancel it and let other folks go to the other SIG face-to-faces. So let me know. But for now, I'm just going to leave it there in case we do want that session, and we can always change it later. First thing on the agenda, I wanted to give a sub-project update for the cloud provider extraction and migration sub-project. And so this is a sub-project under SIG Cloud Provider that is focusing on trying to get all of the in-tree cloud providers removed. And we want all the cloud providers using their out-of-tree cloud controller managers instead of the existing in-tree implementations. And so we meet weekly on Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. And so we recently introduced a new staging repo called Kubernetes/legacy cloud providers. And this is where we're going to start publishing the in-tree cloud providers. So the plan is we're trying to migrate all the in-tree cloud providers to the staging repo so that we have a way to publish the in-tree providers externally so that they can be vendored in from the existing out-of-tree external repos. And so the plan is for 115 that we're going to move all of the in-tree providers that plan to stay in Kubernetes and supporting Kubernetes in the future to this legacy staging repo. And then we're going to give providers the option to, so providers are going to have the option to vendor those legacy providers into their out-of-tree implementations if they want. So this is not required. This is just optional. I know a lot of providers prefer to build their implementations again from scratch and not have to depend on legacy behaviors. But for the providers that do have a dependency to whatever existing behaviors they added in tree, this is kind of a convenient way for them to pull in implementations without having to maintain the providers both out of tree and in tree. So we do have the first PR open for vSphere. When that lands, I'm hoping that we can get PRs open for Azure, AWS, and GCE. And maybe OpenStack. I know Dim said that we may keep OpenStack where it is because we're planning on just removing it instead. Do folks have any questions on this so far?
I just wanted to jump in and say this is a super wonky approach to this problem, but there's precedent for it in the Kubernetes community. We've done this in other places, especially in SIG API machinery, where types need to be vendored into different repositories elsewhere. And it does work, even though it's wonky, and it requires a little extra thought in what get built at what time and where it takes. There is some cognitive toil in where you need to change code and where you need to check it in. So if you have questions or this doesn't make sense to you, that is perfectly natural and expected in some sense. But Walter is a good person, or anyone in SIG API machinery, Chow and others have kind of established this pattern over the years and can offer some guidance and tips if you find it's a strange path.
Yeah, I'm also hoping that naming the repo legacy cloud providers is going to give a clear message that it should not be, frequently updated and developed. We should, as a SIG, also determine some timelines on when we want to completely delete this repo. If not delete, at least cut off the publishing mechanism from staging so that if people want to support it, they just update the external repo directly instead of going through staging. I don't expect us to come up with timelines now or at this meeting, but something to think about for folks. As we get closer to the end of 115, I think that's around the time where we want to come up with a firm deadline to delete that repository. Okay, so the subproject also has a few KEPs in flight. We have 2 KEPs in progress. The first one is supporting an out-of-tree credential provider. This is a mechanism so that cloud providers can provide the kubelet with image pulling credentials without having to compile it in tree. So Mike is taking a lead on this KEP. Mike, do you want to add anything to this?
No, I think that we've kind of got an idea of what the scope of this is. We're trying to introduce a little bit more fine-grained locking to the kubelet, or the controller manager and the cloud controller manager, so that high availability clusters can upgrade fairly easily.
Provider.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was reading ahead. The credential provider, yeah. So the credential provider work is so there's a lot of there's cloud-specific credential providers in tree right now, and how do we move those out without breaking people who are using kind of cross-cloud functionality? Right now, it's kind of, the KEP is kind of dotted lines, just because there's a handful of problems that we need to solve. But hopefully, we're going to soon get to a more concrete proposal that we can talk about more here.
Yeah, and yeah, so continuing what Mike said, the other KEP is shared leader election across the Kube controller manager and the cloud controller manager for all of the cloud-specific controllers. And so this is to make sure that as users migrate between in-tree and out-of-tree cloud providers, we're not going to have a scenario where as you deploy the two different components, you have the cloud controllers running in both of them during version skew. And so having a shared leader election implemented right now can make sure that if you migrate an HA cluster, only one of the components is going to run the cloud controllers at any specific time. So expect a KEP for both of these in the next few weeks. And if anyone's interested in helping implementations with these, let me know, and we can figure something out. And then I don't think Walter's here, but Walter's also working on API server network proxy, which is supposed to replace the the provider-specific SSH tunneling mechanism from the in-tree providers. So there's a repo where the reference implementation is going to live. So if you want to check it out, you should go there. It's empty right now, but something will be there soon.
Cool. Quick comment here. One is, yeah, Walter is in jury duty today, so that's why he's not here. I was trying to find links to the KEPs, and I don't know if I am looking in the right place. So a side comment, under community /KEPs /SIG cloud provider, there is only 4 KEPs.
I think so. This KEP is interesting because it falls under 3 different SIGs: SIG network, API machinery, and cloud provider. So the only interest from our end is that so providers that rely on the SSH tunnel need an API server network proxy to get rid of it. And so This is more like just saying that, hey, if you're a cloud provider and you've been using this SSH tunneling, then you need to implement an outer tree network proxy so that you can get rid of that.
Okay. Yeah, I think
it's under SIG network.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was actually going to say I thought it was under SIG API machinery, but it might have just been discussed there and not.
Let me find
it. So that a link would be great.
Yeah.
I think you also said community, whereas I think we've moved them to enhancements.
Well, it's let me paste it in the chat here. I didn't want to make noise. I just wanted to make sure that we were. There is that one.
I think community. I think we're past community now. We're just making things better.
Okay.
Yeah, I posted the PR in the chat. Folks want to see it. Okay, so that's it for the sub-project. Are there any other questions regarding the sub-project?
Andrew, I had a question on the shared leader election. So last time I talked with Walter, there was also another option to do a multiple stage rollout where you disable the Kube controller manager controllers for like load balancer or the service, and then bring them up on the cloud controller manager. And I don't know if that's an alternative approach that was considered and dropped, and now we're going to shared leader election.
Yeah, I think I could be wrong here, but that mechanism is available today because we have a controllers flag where you can specify which controllers you don't want running. And I think there's even like you can say there's like an enable cloud loops flag or something where the Kube controller manager will look at all the controllers that are under like cloud controllers and disable them. So that's still possible today. I think the justification around the leader election work is that the overhead of adding that second leader election is not that high. And if we can provide a mechanism where like we can do this seamlessly for users, then we should.
And the other rationale behind this was high availability clusters, being able to seamlessly transition from the legacy controller manager to the new one without taking outage.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, if we can reduce downtime, because you have to, if you do that, you have to take one of the components down completely and then wait for the new one to come up. And so this is just a way for us to say, like, you don't have to take your cluster down. You can do this using leader election.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Next topic is by Fabio. Discuss formalization of ownership of code related to the other cloud provider SIGs.
Yeah, so this is essentially a continuation of what we talked about last time when Travis wrote and brought up the question about CSI for the vSphere provider. So we're in the process of folding the SIGs, so that will happen sooner than later. So my question is, right now what we're doing is we're basically just asking the community to create new repos under Kubernetes 6 for basically everything that is not a cloud provider or a cluster API provider for a specific cloud provider, in meaning a cloud platform, really. So I was looking at the wording in the charter of SIG cloud provider, and I couldn't find anything that was basically covering everything else that is not a cloud provider, basically. And I was looking, through the various SIGs that are being planned to be folded inside SIG cloud provider, and just taking SIG AWS as an example. Besides the cloud provider AWS, there's things like ALB ingress controller, IAM authenticator, encryption provider, and 3 different CSI drivers. So I was wondering if we could add some, either throw some ideas around, or if we wanted to have like SIG cloud provider formalize the ownership of all the sub projects as well, and not just cloud providers.
I think formalizing it is a great idea. And I think there are probably some rough guidelines we could come up with where something is directly tied to a specific provider. The behavior of load balancers is a good example. There are also those components, or like CSI drivers is a good example, where it's decoupled from the cloud provider itself. So we may need some directory structure that supports cross clouds or something, cross provider. I don't know the exact terminology we want to use, but I think we can't set up a situation where we have to have copies of certain components in each subdirectory if we can help it. A reference to rather than a copy of is a better path there. So if someone wants to explore that idea, I think it would be really helpful. We'd likely also have to go and see how the CSI folks feel about their current organizational structure, and maybe we just refer to completely different Kubernetes SIGs repos at that level. So I don't know, that's how I've thought about it before, is that there's a distinction between things that are directly tied to a provider and things that are potentially portable across those providers. We should at least make that distinction and build that in from the beginning. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm trying to wrap my brain around the problem, actually. And, one of my concerns was that, there's currently kind of a, bit of a sprawl of this, provider related repos across the Kubernetes properties. And looks like the Kubernetes 6 org is kind of a catch-all for everything that is not like core, and that is not CSI, and that is not, anything else, or incubator or whatever. So I was wondering, given that, and I was browsing through the various project pages, and looks like there's a list, 12, 15, and there's probably more than that, because again, just like SIG VMware has cloud provider vSphere, and cloud provider vSphere really has, one repo and 2 projects inside it. So we're trying to split that up into 2 discrete repos.
Like,
But, I was looking at OpenStack. OpenStack has the same thing. Like they have, cloud provider OpenStack that has like 4 or 5 different projects all inside the same repo.
Right.
So it looks like
I think part of it gets easier if we flip it upside down and consider it as what is a reasonable structure when building a distribution of Kubernetes, and sort of having some consistent structure for that would be useful. Maybe we try to make it more useful than make it a mandate, so that tools like KubeADM or something that's trying to package and build would be able to find all the required and optional bits and put it together into something that works for an end user.
Yeah, I think this is one of the goals and the mandates that we had, and I think that when OpenStack built that repository out, it served our needs, but now we're at the point where it's not serving our needs very well, just because we have essentially siloed groups of people working on different projects inside, and but we only have a small set of reviewers who are kind of handling that workload. What would be, from my point of view, what would be really nice is if, as a SIG cloud provider, as, helping set some institutional guidelines of, maybe actually coming up with, if it's going to be in a monorepo or if it's going to be in smaller repos, how do we coordinate with other SIGs to build a consistent set of practices, so that if you want to go get the VMware cloud provider, you know exactly where to get it, and it's in a similar location to the AWS, and it's a similar location to the Amazon. Similarly for the CSI providers, similarly for the cluster API work that's happening, because that's another repo that's SIG OpenStack is interested in, but that hasn't fallen officially under our SIG, and so a lot of work is happening with that, just by a set of interested parties. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to right now say, institutionally, if you want to have repositories that are hosted somehow inside of the SIG cloud provider structure, that including the requirements of this, you're going to test it and you're going to document it, that it's also, you have a consistent layout across everybody. And I don't think it's a problem we're going to solve quickly, but I think it's a problem we can solve this year as we work through this restructuring process.
I think.
Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say, I think maybe the way to frame it is to say conventions for organization of components or something like that. And I think coming up with some concrete examples, ones that are portable across cloud providers and ones that are specific to individual cloud providers, would shed a lot of light on that. But setting them up as conventions, not requirements or mandates to be included in the documentation, for example, is probably an easy first step, and see how that works in this group. And once we have a proposal for those conventions, we can shop it around a little more.
Because we're always thinking about this, in the eyes of end user, or somebody that is trying to build their own Kubernetes stack, right? And they want to run the stack on a specific cloud provider. Right now, you just have to go shopping around different repos and different documentation. There's some stuff is on the core, some stuff is on the SIG, some stuff is on the CSI, so you have to shop around, and it's confusing, obviously. Also from the other side, so again, just to finish that up, I was thinking that maybe having a single point where we can point people saying, if you're looking for something for your cloud platform, for your cloud provider, you have to go on this org, and you'll find everything that starts with AWS or everything that starts with vSphere or OpenStack is what you're looking for. And this is like the authoritative organization for Kubernetes that contains everything that has to do with your platform you want to run on. And that's from like a user perspective. But from a SIG perspective, like from an ownership and governance perspective, there's also a problem where all these sub-projects, once we fold the SIG, will have to live somewhere. Sub-projects own code, and a sub-project needs to have a sponsoring SIG, right? So again, taking still the example from AWS, we have, cloud provider AWS will be under SIG cloud provider, and that's for sure. That's an easy one. But, we need to formalize if SIG cloud provider is going to own those other sub-projects. And, as far as I can tell, the only other venue that we probed, which is SIG storage, asking if they wanted to take ownership of all the CSI providers, looks like they got back to us with a strong no. They don't want to do that. So I was wondering if we want to take ownership of that or not.
I don't think we have a choice, because when we fold, right, we have all the existing CSI drivers that were under the SIGs are going to fall into sub-projects. And so I think a reasonable next step is having our charter account for those CSI drivers, and then maybe add a note in the charter saying longer term, we may want to do something else with this. I don't know what that is, but.
Yeah, that I agree. We don't get that choice. I think you buy the whole package, not just the parts you want. And I think we bought the whole package, so.
All right, I can propose an amendment to the various places for SIG cloud providers, saying that SIG cloud provider is gonna own all the repos that are kind of orphaned by the SIG folding. So I can do that. And in terms of organization, I don't know if we want to discuss this a little longer, but I think that we could be doing something around the lines of creating maybe a different org and calling, I don't know, Kubernetes cloud providers or some other name, and put everything under there.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to discuss that in the mailing list. But yeah, if you open a PR for the charter, let's queue that up for the next meeting. And then potential new orgs we can talk in the mailing list. I think that was the plan originally for the cloud provider -star repos. But yeah, I don't know. It's just not really a high priority, but definitely something we should discuss.
For me, in my mind, high priority is just, take ownership of whatever is left out in the cold. And everything else is fine to discuss, but, not to take action until we thought long and hard about it.
Yeah, sounds good.
Like it.
All right.
All right, let me just add a note here. Action item. Okay. So next item is by Jose. Discuss idea for allowing provider-specific topology labels.
Hello. So yeah, I'm Jose. I'm from Red Hat. I'm coming primarily from SIG storage, so that's where my bias lies. Basically, I found that Andrew put up a KEP for promoting the what are they called? Cloud provider labels to GA. And then I started thinking, that what if there was a more generic way to allow individual providers to specify their own topologies, their own topology labels, so that applications could make more intelligent decisions about how to spread themselves out across a given provider. Since even among the cloud providers, there aren't exact one-to-one mappings of all the different topology layers that are available. The primary use case that I'm seeing for this, namely the one I come from, is for containerized storage, where we want to, both in the cloud and on-premise, be able to distribute our storage devices across as many failure domains as possible. So part of this generic interface would also be allowing a mechanism for Kubernetes administrators, via the use of new CRDs, for instance, to specify their own topology layouts for their on-premise platforms. So they could get as granular as being like, it's on this rack, it's in this row, it's in this room, it's in this data center, things like that. So I figured instead of trying to come up with something that was even just specific to our storage system, there might be something in looking into a solution, but more generally for on-premise users and more broadly for any platform providers in general. I already talked to Andrew about this a little bit, and he suggested I come here to present it to a broader audience and see if I could get any more feedback on the idea.
Jose, are you looking beyond like zone and stuff like that? Are you looking for more detailed description of where this particular node exists? Is this the question right now?
That is part of the goal, but also like just being able for, basically we want to be able, because the project I'm working on is very concerned with providing a first-class experience to on-premise users or on-premise admins. So we want to be able to let them tell us what sort of topology they want us to distribute against. So like if they want us to do across data centers or across different rooms in the same data center, we want to be able to facilitate that. And I figured trying to allow them to define a topology and then implement that as labels on their nodes, for instance, might be appealing to other people.
Yeah, I know of providers right now who have implemented rack topology, but they use a zones label because that's what's provided. And that's not ideal, right? We want the labels to actually say what the topology it's providing. So I think, so it seems like the question.
No, go ahead.
It seems like the question is like, do we want providers to implement their own control loops that add these labels themselves, or do we want to integrate that into the node initialization logic and maybe provide a generic method and interface, like get labels for nodes, and let the provider implementations like give the core controllers a set of labels to apply for every node resource? So like, do we want to keep that? Do we want to like push that logic upstream into core, or do we want to let providers like implement their own control loops for this? Is the question, I guess.
I have a concern here, just a side topic to every time I hear extending the labels or extending the annotations. The problem is if you have a well-known label, then let's have it as a part of the type itself, and instead of just label. The reason behind that is that having it as a field or a property or as a part of the type, it means that we don't rely on valid. Like there is no guesswork on the node, the type name, sorry, the label name, right, or the data type expected to be in it.
And there's versioning.
And there is versioning, and there is a lot of ands that goes into having it as part of the type. Obviously, the node type right now is humongous, so we should approach this carefully. As for who supports the value, I'm okay with having this as part of the labels that the cloud provider is throwing at, all right? But to tell you the truth, most of the information that's are part of that particular discussion can be centrally patched to the node, meaning I can have one controller that does this on behalf of the entire cluster, instead of having every node just grinding to get those same labels, which probably going to be the same across, let's say, 1/3 of the cluster or 1/10 of the cluster. Maybe thinking about it in a way that allows us to do this or that might be a better option.
So it sounds a lot like the topology aware something scheduling, volume scheduling. Is that
topology aware provisioning?
Yeah.
Okay.
It seems like if you run Cassandra, if you run stuff like Cassandra, this is really important, right? For people.
Yeah. I understand the need for and the extension that's being proposed. I'm just trying to get the right people in that discussion to make sure we're extending what we're building on previous discussions instead of starting over again. So it sounds like I forget
There are three things. There's at least three things. There's volumes, there's services, i.e. networking, and there's scheduling. In other words, like spreading it across racks.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying to pick a SIG, you have to pick carefully.
So what I'm trying to get at is, what is the motivation for this discussion here right now? Is it to bring that thinking from the topology aware volume scheduling here to just determine if there are other interested parties? Or is it to get support to add the concepts of data centers and racks to those supported topologies? Or
I think if we're following what volumes did, I think with the volumes implementation, and I could be wrong here, so please correct me if I'm wrong. We have well-known labels like zones and regions, but we still keep the we keep the interface for getting the labels generic. And so I think you could return like a rack or data center label for volumes, but it's for nodes. Like the nodes have to match the labels provided for volumes. And right now, the way we apply labels for nodes is it's pretty, it's not really extensible. Like it's just hard coded.
mm-hmm. And so is the proposal here to make a junk in the trunk label where you can add whatever you want, or to add specifically data center and zone?
I think the right approach is whatever we want. So like have the provider return a map of string to strings. Obviously keeping backwards compatibility and not returning, like still returning the labels we previously supported, but I think it'd be good to keep that interface generic for any labels in the future.
Yeah, junk into trunk, as it was said. Basically, if we follow the proposal to promote the provider labels as topology.kubernetes.io, you could have aws.topology.kubernetes.io or vmware.topology.kubernetes.io, and then they could just be / whatever they want.
And in practice, is this what providers are doing already anyway, just with some daemon set that applies those labels after installation? Or not yet?
I haven't seen it all that often.
Okay.
No, there's the only vague instance I know of is in CSI drivers, where CSI drivers are able to put their own node information in a CSI node CRD that is associated with an actual Kubernetes node. And then that CSI node information gets passed to the CSI driver. So there are so there parts of storage are doing something like this already. But the issue comes in, the issue comes in with, the project I work on, which is software-defined storage, where we are not a separate storage thing underneath Kubernetes. We are storage in Kubernetes. And so our distribution, especially in something like AWS or GCE, depends entirely on the distribution of nodes on that provider.
Okay, and is the fundamental trade-off here that sort of the common interface means the least common denominator and being able to use the features of different providers fully versus being more portable, consistent? Is that the...
Basically, yeah. So with the this would be in tandem with the existing topology labels on nodes, so that an application that just wants to use the general labels, for instance, of zone and region, could use that for whatever they want. But then other applications that want to provide more finer granularity on unsupported providers, they would be able to make use of this additional information straight from the straight from the kubectl or straight from the kube API.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the other trade-off is like delegating the label keys to providers, which means that they're more likely to make a breaking change, which could be dangerous. But I don't know. I feel like if it's documented well, and it's clear that labels, like once a label is beta or GA or whatever, you can't change it pretty much.
It is part of the API, and
yeah. Anyways, yeah, it seems like this discussion needs a bit more thought from everyone else. So, Jose, do you mind maybe putting something on the mailing list, and then folks can follow up if they have more thoughts on this?
Sure.
This is a great topic, by the way. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, I'm personally in favor of the just letting the providers set all the label keys and values themselves. But yeah, let's talk offline or not offline, on email.
Yeah.
And then, and then, just to be explicit about it, since I am bringing up the idea, I am interested in driving it forward if it gains enough support. So I'd be looking into writing up the KEP and maybe doing some initial implementation as well.
Awesome, thank you. All right. Next topic is API shadowing. Chris. Is Chris still on the call?
Yep, I'm here. Yeah. So this was an email that went out to the SIG leads mailing list, and so I'm just kind of rebroadcasting that out for everybody. Where it looks like SIG API is they'd like to have some people who can shadow, who can they can learn how to do API reviews. And so, kind of responding to this email. I mean, the details are, to develop reviewers in each SIG area and to distribute expertise and increase review bandwidth. So, if take a look at that email. If you are interested in kind of getting a little bit more expertise in reviewing APIs. Then I think this is a good opportunity to pick up those skills and follow along with some people who've been doing it for a while. I think that there's certainly opportunity for everybody to get involved in that. So that was just it, just a little announcement of that posting that came in last week.
Yeah, I want to follow on that. This is an amazing opportunity to grow for almost anyone. If you look back over a year to see what Jordan has reviewed and like how many PRs he comments on and reviews, it's mind-boggling how much surface area he has covered. There are a handful of others who do like the next level number of reviews, and those folks are just looking both to transition some of their knowledge and get some more bandwidth. The same collection of people both implement very ambitious features and are on the hook for all the reviews. At the end of every quarter, it's madness. So this is really a tremendous opportunity, regardless of how much experience you have, just to shadow and see what it is they're looking for, what patterns they're looking for, how they do the things they do to keep the Kubernetes code base safe and secure, and avoid big incidents for large customers that wake us all up in the middle of the night. So really, this is a unique opportunity. It doesn't come along often in a career, honestly. And if you have even any interest, just respond to the email, get on the mailing list, and just see what the shadow process is.
Yeah, and you don't have to sign up to shadow like all API reviews. You can, like Chris said, you can sign up for SIG specific API reviews. So for this SIG, it would be any of the controllers that might change, like we mentioned before, labels on node resources, things like that. All right. Jago, I think you got the next one.
Oh, well, I got the next one, but really it was just a hat tip to Chris, who put together the slide deck for the SIG update at the community meeting last week. Those of you who didn't join the community meeting, you should take a look at that. There's interesting information about what the SIG has been up to. If you miss a meeting, this is a higher level view of that. If you're new and are just catching up, it's a good starting point. So great job, Chris. Thank you for that. And wanted to give a shout out.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and thanks to everyone in the SIG who, I mean, I tried to make sure in that presentation too that I listed a lot of names of people who have been contributing and working on the SIG here. And, you know, it's been awesome to see how quickly this SIG has grown and how active it is. It's really fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Okay. Any other last minute topics, questions that anyone wants to bring up? Going once, going twice, 3 times. All right, then I'll give everyone back 15 minutes. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Andrew, if you have a few minutes, can I talk with you? I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Yeah. So.
Bye, gang.
Bye.
Just a question on the vendoring, the PR. Just all right. I seem to not understand the details. So you moved the cloud provider into a separate repo, and then you vendored it back into Kubernetes. That's what this PR is all about. Or did you move all and then you vendored back?
Are you talking about the legacy cloud providers one?
Yes.
Yeah. So so the plan there is move the in-tree provider, so everything under like package, cloud providers, /providers, you know, Azure, AWS, into that staging repo. And we're not vendoring. Oh, I guess yes, we are vendoring that back through the staging mechanism into like the kubelet and the kube-control manager and all that. The only thing changing is like the import path, right?
Yeah.
And then for your external repos, so like cloud provider, Azure, cloud provider, AWS, like you can then vendor that published repository back into your other tree provider if you wanted to support whatever you have. Yeah.
All right. So we have so basically any cloud provider have the option to just keep as is and then switch to that. Right. All right. So I tried to I really looked at it. It's a very big PR to get any details out of. All right. That's it. That's the question I have. Thanks,
Awesome.
man.
Yeah, no worries.
All right.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, man. Bye.